Luna here, and today we're going to find out, can you beat Oblivion while always sneaking? That's probably going to be more complicated than one would assume at first glance, but we'll see. Maybe the stealth archer will still pull through. Let's go over the rules. We must always be sneaking, meaning that we're crouched down. Most of the time, the little eye will be on the screen, but sometimes during cutscenes, even though we're still crouched down, we're still sneaking, the eye will disappear. That's fine. Chameleon and Invisibility effects are not allowed. They would make things way too easy. No glitches, cheats, or gameplay mods. Official DLC is allowed. In Oblivion, we cannot talk to NPCs while sneaking unless they initiate the conversation. Doing so will attempt to pickpocket them instead. This would make the challenge impossible because we wouldn't even be able to give Joffrey the Amulet of Kings, but that would be a boring run, so we're going to make an exception for main quest critical conversations. However, we cannot talk to anyone else, so we'll be unable to start most side quests, join guilds, except maybe the Dark Brotherhood, barter with shopkeepers, or access services like training, because we only communicate via arrows to the face. This also prevents us from accessing most of the DLC player homes features, like Frostcrag Spire's spellcrafting altar, because we cannot barter with the NPCs selling the upgrades. I may attempt to pickpocket the upgrades to see if that's possible, but even if it is, they have high value and would probably be difficult to steal. Melee weapon swings are very slow while sneaking and only gain extra damage when we're undetected. Ideally, we don't want enemies to get close, so archery will be essential. Ranged magic also works, but we can't buy spells and likely can't craft our own, so our access to magic will be limited to our starting spells and whatever spell tomes we're lucky enough to find. Even if we can steal the mage tallow candles and craft spells at Frostcrag Spire, we'll be limited to spell effects we start with or obtain through standing stone powers or spell tomes. So to the surprise of absolutely nobody, we're building a stealth archer. Agility affects bow damage, so for once it'll do something. And speed will be helpful for crouch running away. On that note, athletics does not increase while sneaking, and since swimming prevents us from sneaking, we aren't allowed to swim either. Increasing our speed will be the only way to move faster once we're done with character creation. Athletics bonuses from our class and race will help, so we'll prioritize those. Other skill bonuses don't matter much, we can increase them later if needed. Altmer, Orcs, and Imperials have subpar attributes for this run and lack useful powers for the situations we're likely to be in. Don't get me wrong, Berserk is great in melee, and magic users can use it to tank, but it drains agility by 100, so as hilarious as angrily sneaking would be, it wouldn't be helpful. You'd think Bosmer would be a shoo-in for a stealth archer, but they're still horrible. Their attributes are good for this run, but they get no athletics bonus and their powers and resistances are useless. Their bonuses to sneak, marksman, light armor, and alchemy would be useful in theory, but we can raise those skills as any race. Brenton's 50% magic resistance was tempting despite their pitiful agility, speed, and endurance, and lack of an athletics bonus. That's how OP their magic resistance is. But it's a goal of mine to play other races whenever I can justify it for variety's sake. Nords have good attributes, but surprisingly they get no athletics bonus, and their powers and 50% frost resistance would be situational at best. Dunmer have solid attributes, 75% fire resistance, and a 5-point athletics bonus. Khajiit also have good attributes, a 5-point athletics bonus, and Night Eye, but I think there are better options. Argonians have great speed and agility, but low endurance. Their resistances are nearly useless, and they lack powers. However, they're also tied with Redguards for the highest athletics bonus at +10, and have better speed than Redguards, so they're hands down the fastest starting option. This is the first time they've made it into the running, and they're one of my favorites. However, I have to admit Redguards are better. They have less speed and agility, but 20 more endurance than Argonians, the same athletics bonus, and the adrenaline rush power, which massively fortifies their agility, speed, strength, endurance, and health for 60 seconds once per day. It's the adrenaline rush that cinches it. This is a rare run where I'd be willing to trade endurance for speed and agility of all things. Argonians' lack of powers is baffling. I think Bethesda gave their water breathing more credit than it was worth because after Morrowind, underwater exploration in their games was severely reduced. Oblivion has some, but water breathing is easy to get. You can get it from a ring right outside the Imperial City for taking out a few slaughterfish. Even though a Red Guard would be better, and arguably a Dunmer or Khajiit would do well too, Argonians are going to take their silver medal and run with it because when else will they be this close to winning? Sadly, an underwater run isn't in the cards. We're doing the tutorial because, oddly, none of my sewer exit saves crouch-walked the whole way. None of the fights are difficult, but we do have to load once when I reflexively stood up to fight the first goblin. I really wish I could unbind the sneak crouch key, but no such luck on console. We'll just have to be careful. We pick the thief for our birth sign. I considered the lady for more endurance and willpower, which would give us slightly better health and magicka regen, but I don't think we'll be using many spells, and frankly, if we get swarmed, I doubt 20 extra health will save us, so more agility and speed from the thief is probably the way to go. The steed might be a good pick, but I don't know if its extra 10 speed over the thief would be enough to make a difference while sneaking. I'm hoping we'll be able to outrun slower enemies, or at least buy ourselves time by backpedaling, but faster foes like mountain lions will be able to run us down no matter what. For our class, we specialize in stealth to increase sneak, light armor, marksman, and acrobatics faster, and favor speed and agility. I considered swapping one of them for endurance, but at this point we're going all in on glass cannon and hoping that works at low levels. For our major skills, we pick athletics because this is the only way we can increase it to 35. Otherwise, we'd have 15 thanks to our racial bonus. Most other races would be stuck with 10 or even 5. We also pick conjuration because a summoned skeleton might be useful as a decoy, restoration to make healing a little cheaper, destruction for a couple last-ditch frost and shock touch spells, light armor, marksman, and sneak. I think we can join the Dark Brotherhood. Lucian and Ochiva initiate the conversations during the A Knife in the Dark quest, so we should be able to get a set of shrouded armor. The old lady at Applewatch is easy to take out without getting a bounty, even though we can't one-shot her. I feel bad about the dog, though. Afterwards, we take a nap and Lucian wakes us up.
You sleep rather soundly for a murderer. So, I have your rapt attention. Splendid. Now listen closely. On the green road to the north of Breville lies the Inn of Ill Omen. There you will find a man named Rufio. Kill him, and your initiation into the Dark Brotherhood will be complete.
Getting to the Inn of Ill Omen takes a while at crouch running pace, even with our speed, and we gain the last skill increase to level up while traveling. We'll take care of that once we're done with Rufio. Rufio is weaker than the Applewatch lady and is a one-shot with our rusty dagger. So we take another nap, ascend to level 2 for 2 intelligence, 5 agility, and 5 endurance, and get woken up by Lucian again. Gods above, back up a bit, Lucian. I don't want to see the inside of your skull. Thankfully, we can fast travel to Shadenhall. We arrive still sneaking, so it causes no issues, and enter the Dark Brotherhood sanctuary there. Ochiva approaches us and hands us our shrouded armor. She also tells us to speak with Vicente Valtieri for contracts, and for what it's worth, we do try, but we end up rifling through his pockets. It's worth noting that completing the initiation into the Dark Brotherhood gave us 1 infamy. Because we have the Knights of the Nine DLC installed, this infamy makes us unable to use way shrines. That makes sense, but I think it should have been linked to our murder stat instead of, or in addition to infamy, Because apparently the 9 Divines were okay with what we did to the Apple Watch lady and didn't get mad until we took out Rufio. Thankfully, we don't need them to cure diseases. We're immune to everything except vampirism, and it would be fitting for this crab-walking Argonian who only communicates via violence and pickpocketing to become a vampire. Way shrines were also the easiest way to restore our attributes, but we're resistant to poison, one of the main sources of attribute damage, and we can make potions to restore attributes, so it isn't the end of the world. We can start Daedric quests because we can activate their shrines while sneaking, although we can't complete any of them that require talking to other NPCs. Most of the artifacts are either melee weapons we can't use effectively, or staves that must be recharged. That's a problem because we have no reliable way of getting Soul Trap. Even if we'd taken Mysticism as a major skill, we wouldn't have started with Soul Trap, and we can't buy spells. We can't do Mage's Guild quests for a Mage's Staff of Soul Trap, so our only way of getting Soul Trap would be to find a spell tome or a weapon with a Soul Trap enchantment by random loot luck, which I only seem to get when we don't need it. We can't pay for recharges either, so the Staff of Corruption, Wabbajack, Sanguine Rose, and weapon enchantments in general will be finite. The Ring of Namira would be useful, apparel doesn't need to be recharged, and it only requires us to get to level 5, so enemies won't get much stronger. At level 5, we'll be able to start Namira's, Azura's, and Sheogorath's quests. However, since we want to keep the Ring of Namira and we can't complete Sheogorath's quest without talking to the Border Watch's shaman, the only artifact we can give to Martin at that level is Azura's Star. That's fine, we probably won't be able to soul trap anything to fill it anyway, but we need glow dust to offer to Azura. The low-level will-o-wisps near Azura's shrine don't spawn until Martin asks us for a Daedric artifact, and we can't purchase glow dust, but we can swipe some from the Bruma Mages Guild. We can't just join the Mages Guild and legally take everything they own, though. We have to get into their living quarters and take it undetected. It's still not that hard as long as we break in during the day while they're upstairs, but it was still an unusual snag. We travel to Azura's shrine from Frostcrag Spire. We can't use its spellcrafting altar, but we can use it to make this trip a little shorter. On that note, we tried to pickpocket mage tallow candles from Arelinway? Arelinway. Good lord, elven names, why? She didn't have them on her. We didn't find them anywhere in the Mystic Emporium either. In my experience, this is often the case with merchant inventories in Oblivion. A few things might exist in the store, but most of it is in some inaccessible container, so if you can't buy it, you can't have it. Anyway, back to Azura. The vampires she wants us to take out are in a cramped mine, and despite fighting them several times, I still always back into a corner whenever I try to backpedal in here. Two of the vampires, the orcs, are always pretty strong in melee, so this whole ordeal is a worst-case scenario for us. We get through the first 3, including one of the orcs, without too much trouble, but the second orc and the mage vampire with him are a nightmare to deal with. We can one-shot the mage with a sneak attack from our bow, and that's the best way to start the battle because she can do a lot of damage with her spells, and once the orc is in our face, hitting her is very difficult. The orc, on the other hand, is barely even tickled by our sneak attack. He probably thought the cave had a draft. Not only that, he's fast enough to run us down and pulverizes us in seconds. It took several tries, we burnt through almost all our healing potions, and I think we would have lost the winning attempt anyway if the game hadn't taken pity on us and broke the orc's brain for several seconds. I have no idea why he locked up. We staggered him and backed into a corner, but he could get to us, as he demonstrated when his brain turned back on, and he nearly squashed us before we finally took him down. We caught porphyric hemophilia during one of the attempts, proving that our 100% disease resistance doesn't fully protect us against it, but we didn't catch it during the attempt we won, and we are not fighting him again. We normally only have to take a couple hits to catch porphyric hemophilia, so maybe it doesn't completely ignore disease resistance like I thought. We're having serious trouble keeping our gear repaired. We can't pay for repairs or buy repair hammers, so we're limited to the hammers we find or steal. It might have been worth swapping out one of our major skills for Armorer to make our repair hammers last longer, and repairing enchanted gear requires 50 Armorer, so our shrouded armor might spend most of the run broken. It does still give us its skill fortifications while it's broken, so there's that. But if we need actual armor, we'll have to use unenchanted gear for now. We grind heavy armor and block by catching arrows with our face. This increases our arrow supply, by the way, and level up to level 3 for 5 intelligence and endurance and 4 agility. These aren't perfect level ups, I'm only making an effort to get endurance. The intelligence and agility are happening on their own from alchemy, marksmanship, and sneak skill increases. I'd like more speed, but we haven't gotten many light armor or acrobatics increases, and we can't increase athletics. Getting to one of our usual early grinding spots was more challenging than usual because we couldn't swim to the ruin from the sewer exit at the end of the tutorial because swimming prevents us from sneaking. I guess we can add hydrophobia to this Argonian's list of character quirks. We may as well start the main quest while we work on getting the last 2 levels for the Ring of Namira. Joffrey causes the first failure of the run because he refuses to look up from his book, forcing us to stand up and talk to him so we can hand him the Amulet of Kings and start this disaster. It would be really anticlimactic to end the run here because Joffrey has the awareness of a toadstool, but we'll keep track of these failures. We can go through the Kvatch Oblivion gate with no more failures, although the Tremora's magic roasts us alive, or unalive as it were. Combat either goes really well if we get a sneak attack, which rarely one-shots but still hurts, or really poorly with us getting swarmed or taken out by magic. The 50 Shades of Red art direction in Oblivion Gates makes it hard to spot enemies at a distance, but their layouts make more sense to me than the vampire mines, so we don't get cornered nearly as often. Outside the gate, Savlian forces us to commit not 1, but 2 run failures because he refuses to head into the city without us holding his hand. We try to avoid standing up to talk to him. We pickpocket him, which does nothing. We attack him and lead him to the chapel, which is harder than it sounds because the Daedra in the square annihilates Savlian, and we have to get his attention again when he wakes up. But even if we lead him right to the chapel doors, he won't follow us inside until we progress the Siege of Kvatch quest by talking to him. We also tried attacking and then yielding to see if that would start a conversation, but it didn't. So we had to stand up and tell Savlian to do his job. Then we had to do it again after we cleared the square so he'd go inside the chapel. We tried talking to Martin to see if he'd follow us after the square was clear, but he won't leave the civilians until Savlian sends them to the encampment, so we have to speak to Savlian the second time after we load back to undo the unsuccessful attempt to talk to Martin.
No.
Then we fail the challenge for the 3rd time in this sequence because Martin won't speak to us unless we stand up. Yes, we tried our preferred forms of communication, attacking and pickpocketing, on him too. They didn't work. We also tried following him to the encampment to see if he would approach us there, but no such luck. Thankfully, Urthor and Joffrey initiate the conversations at Wayne and Priory so we can find out how much of a screw-up Joffrey is without more run failures. Sadly, once we're at Cloud Ruler Temple, Joffrey stares at us vacantly until we remind him that he lost the Amulet of Kings and we should try to retrieve it, forcing the 5th failure of the run. He isn't the only one. Boris ignores us even if we hop up on the bar and kick a plate of carrots into his face. In fact, he won't say anything of note unless we sit at the bar with him. Sitting down is also a run failure because we stop sneaking. But speaking to Boris is not an additional failure. We only stopped sneaking once. We just did it by sitting down instead of standing.
Get up in a minute and walk out of
Boris also makes us stand up to talk to him after we take out the cultist following him.
I'll keep an eye out in case any
He'll tell us to search the body as if we weren't a ludaholic, but he won't speak to us once we have the book, even if we grab it while he's heading towards us to tell us to search. He'll stop and stare at us until we stand up and tell him about the book. He directs us to Tarmina, who also won't acknowledge our existence until we stand up and speak to her, even if we jump on her head. She points us to Phintius, the owner of the first edition bookstore. We tried to get around speaking to Phintius by stealing the third volume of the culty books, but Bethesda couldn't be bothered to put in alternate ways of completing this quest, so instead of putting an order receipt leading us to Gwyneth in the book, or making Gwyneth show up right after we steal the book, we must speak to Phintius to get Gwyneth to appear. We tried waiting in the store, both with the wait menu and in real time, and he wouldn't show up until Phintius told us about him. However, we do not have to speak to Gwyneth. We can pickpocket the note about the meeting with the sponsor in the sewers, and Boris will approach us of his own accord after that. We trek through the sewers as usual, and since we're only level 3, the few goblins present are weak. Boris tells us to cover him while he meets the sponsor, and for once we'll go along with his plan. If we meet the sponsor, we'll be forced to sit in a chair and fail again, but we can cover Boris without breaking the rules. Not that Boris survives the process. The lackeys are fairly weak, but Raven Cameron's magic hurts. We have no magic or elemental resistances, and dodging lightning at close range while crab walking isn't easy. He took us out the first time, but the second time went better because we got a sneak attack on Raven before turning our attention to the lackeys. And while Boris barely did any damage to Raven, he did keep his attention long enough for us to take out the lackeys so we could deal with Raven alone. At levels 1 to 5, Raven has a base ring of Fire Shield. While it isn't as impressive as most of the higher level rings he can have, it will boost both our physical and fire defenses, both of which are sorely lacking. Thankfully, we don't have to speak to Tarmina again, even though the quest marker points to her. We can skip her and visit the tomb in Green Emperor Way with the glowing red map showing the way to the Mythic Dawn Shrine. We can't interact with it earlier in the quest. Trust me, if we could skip more of the culty book hunt, we would, because it's responsible for 5 run failures. 1 when we reminded Joffrey the Amulet of Kings was missing, 2 in the bar with Boris, 1 with Tarmina, and 1 with Phintius. That brings us to a total of 9 failures. We leveled up to level 5 after that ordeal. Level 4 grants 4 intelligence and endurance and 5 agility, but level 5 didn't include any endurance or alchemy grinding, so we got 2 intelligence and endurance and 4 agility. Still, we have 53 intelligence, 65 speed, 46 endurance, and 83 agility, so our attributes aren't too bad. We won't be leveling further. We lack the ability to craft spells, repair enchanted gear, or obtain most quest rewards, so our best bet for surviving at high levels would be to save Scum sigil stones to make shield and magic resistance clothing and accessories. Admittedly, getting past high-level Daedra while crab walking would be tricky, but with enough bunny hopping and potions, I'm certain it could be done. The more enchantments we obtained, the easier the process would get, and the run would be a cakewalk once we were nearly immune to damage, as I've demonstrated in other runs. We can have a little damage and spell reflection, though, as a treat. Hi, Namira. We're a hydrophobic Argonian who crab walks everywhere, hates talking to people, and prefers to communicate via arrows to the face. We should fit right in with your misery-loving followers. Also, we're drunk on cheap wine to make ourselves even more repugnant. After we snuff out the torches of priests of Arche so Namira's followers can show them what happens when you ignore their wishes to be left alone, Namira grants us her ring, which provides 12% damage reflection and 10% spell reflection. If we had a way of recharging items, I'd be tempted to get the Staff of Corruption from Vermina, or even get to level 10 so we could get the Sanguine Rose and Spellbreaker. Spellbreaker's 30% spell reflection is almost useful enough to justify leveling up to level 10 by itself, but not quite. I was also tempted to get Hatred Soul, a bow that does 16 damage as opposed to our black bow's 10, but it's enchanted and we can't repair enchanted gear. I'd really love to find a bound bow spell tome, but I'd rather not grind for random loot unless we have to. We could make a permanent bound bow using a runestone, but that violates the no glitches rule, so for now we're going to make do with our black bow and move on with the main quest. The raid on the Mythic Dawn Shrine was more difficult than usual, meaning we couldn't wade through them like a slasher villain because their magic tore us a new one unless we rolled a lucky spell reflection. Still, none of them took many arrows to put down, and sneak attacks often one-shot them, so as long as we were careful to avoid alerting too many at once, or made the acolytes run away quickly, we were fine. Once we were back at Cloud Ruler Temple, Joffrey intercepted us to tell us to talk to Martin, even though the quest log, quest marker, and common sense had all already told us to do that, but Martin wouldn't talk to us. Pickpocketing or attacking him didn't work, and I'm going to assume they never will work because we've tried several times on different NPCs, and at this point it feels like a waste of time. We will jump around them for a bit to make sure they see us and have a chance to initiate the conversation. We'll get to why in a moment. It isn't just to express my frustration. After handing the cultist book to Martin, he tells us to talk to Joffrey about spies. Despite initiating a completely pointless conversation a moment ago, Joffrey refuses to talk to us, so we have to take another failure and stand up to talk to him. Thankfully, we don't have to talk to Captain Stefan or Bird to find the spies, since we already know they hang around the Standing Stone near Cloud Ruler Temple. In fact, we run into both of the spies there at the same time, which is a first for me. The quest pushes us to talk to Bird again so we can get permission from him to search the spy's home, but we can ignore that step and break in. With our sneak skill, the guards probably wouldn't notice if we broke in with a full orchestral accompaniment. We find the plans and return to Joffrey, who forced us to stand up to report in for yet another failure. He directed us to Martin, who forced us to speak to him so he could tell us he needs a Daedric artifact. Thankfully, we already have Azura's star, so we can give it to him during this conversation. If we didn't have it, we'd have to incur an extra run failure later to give him an artifact. Martin told us to report to Joffrey, and I thought Joffrey would force us to stand up again, but right as we stood up, he finally stopped talking to a random blade and spoke to us of his own accord. Of course, we had to load our last autosave, which thankfully was very recent because we'd already stood up. Then we had to wait for him to finish a meandering conversation with another random blade, so he would finally tell us to help Bird with the Oblivion Gate outside Bruma. We pushed him away from the others to make sure he would speak to us. All told, the back and forth at Cloud Ruler Temple wrapping up a Mythic Dawn Shrine raid, taking out the world's worst spies, completing Blood of the Daedra, and starting the Bruma Gate quest caused 4 failures, bringing us to a total of 13. Let's see if Bird causes any more. He speaks to us as we approach, so that's sorted, and we don't have to do any talking while we're in the Oblivion Gate. The 2 guards with him are useful distractions and deal decent damage at this level, so we wait every few combat encounters so they heal up. They don't survive the final battle at the top of the Sigil Tower, but that doesn't affect anything. They don't even appear in the battle for Bruma. Unfortunately, we have to talk to Bird outside the gate, because apparently hearing him say, "Thanks, we've got it from here," is absolutely critical to the mission. We waited until his men were done saying they thought we were toast to see if Bird would initiate the conversation, but he just walked away, so we had to chase after him while sneaking, stand up, and speak to him before he moved away, bringing us to 14 run failures. Future Luna here, I do kind of wonder if maybe we could have skipped talking to Bird here and just gone straight to Joffrey. I didn't think to try that at the time, so the failure stands, but yeah, if you want to try this one yourself, feel free to try skipping this conversation with Bird. I do kind of wonder if that's possible. Upon returning to Cloud Ruler Temple, we have to stand up to report to Joffrey about closing the Oblivion Gate. He tells us to speak to Martin about the ritual, only for Martin to send us back to Joffrey because for some reason only Joffrey can tell us about Sancretor. I find the constant bouncing back and forth between Joffrey and Martin to be a pace killer even during normal gameplay. Frankly, I think the only reason Joffrey is involved so much is so Bethesda didn't have to pay Sean Bean for all the lines, because there's no reason Martin couldn't tell us about this. It may have been possible to combine the conversations with Joffrey if we'd gotten Martin to tell us about Tiber Septim's armor before we reported back to Joffrey about Bird. During my Daedric Artifacts only run, Martin told us about Tiber Septim's armor before we even gave him a Daedric Artifact, but he wouldn't tell us about it this time until we told Joffrey about the Oblivion Gate, so the best we could manage was 3 conversations. Report to Joffrey about Bird, talk to Martin about the armor, and then return to Joffrey to get the key to Sancretor, bringing us to 17 failures. Thankfully, going through Sancretor shouldn't cause any more. We don't have to talk to the Blade's ghosts for them to break the barrier blocking the way to Tiber Septim's armor. That isn't to say we don't have any problems. The undead blades are easy to deal with, and one of them has a shield with an 8% damage reflection enchantment we can use. But the ghosts scattered around the hallways are immune to our weapons. I'm glad we picked Destruction as a major skill. Even though we're using the Flare spell we'd have had either way, the boost to our skill made it cheaper to cast. And considering we still used all our Magicka potions and a couple Welkin stones before it was all said and done, I'd say that helped. Normally we'd return Tiber Septim's armor to Martin right away, but we're going to Miskarkand first. Unlike Sancretor, we can enter Miskarkand and obtain the Great Welkin Stone at any time, and if we have it and the armor, it'll combine both quests into one conversation, avoiding a failure. Sadly, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. While Bethesda changed the dialogue, including paying Sean Bean for extra lines, they did not account for everything properly in the quest stages, and the stage that tells Martin to equip his armor is skipped when giving him the Great Welkin Stone this way. This means he will only have robes during the final parts of the main quest, including the battle for Bruma and the rush to the Temple of the One, where he isn't essential and we have to keep him alive. I'm not too worried about getting him to the Temple of the One because we can run past most of the combat, but the battle for Bruma is a lot messier. We can't get allies for Bruma either. Obtaining aid from the various cities requires talking to the local count, or in Kavach's case, Savlian. Not that the city guards are much better than the Bruma militia that appear in their absence, but I figured it was worth mentioning. That's future Luna's problem though. Right now we need to get the Great Welkin Stone. The undead are all vulnerable to normal weapons here, and the goblins are pretty weak. On top of that, the undead and goblins fight each other way more than they go for us. Possibly because they can't find us. The Lich goes down in about 3 shots because we got multiple sneak attacks on him. Its zombies did manage to find us, but they're slow enough for us to avoid while shooting, even though we're sneaking. It took a lot of arrows to get through all the enemies though, and we can't buy more, so we head to Rockmilk Cave between Leyawiin and Breville. It's home to the Blackbow Bandits, who are under attack by marauders. Many of the marauders and all the Blackbow Bandits have bows and arrows, and between the infighting and their low health, we walk away with more arrows than we entered with every time. Sometimes they have useful potions, and if we're lucky, we might find repair hammers on the marauders or in containers scattered around the cave. Sadly, we still can't repair enchanted items. Even if we'd made armor or major skill, I doubt we'd be able to because it's a struggle to grind the skill. We have no shortage of broken gear, but we're always low on repair hammers and we need the ones we have to repair our bow. We have to stand up to hand Martin Tiber Septim's armor and the Great Welkin Stone, and then he makes us tell the Countess of Bruma that her city is being used as Great Gate bait. Why are you sending the crab-walking Argonian who hates talking to people to deal with her? Of course we have to stand up to talk to her too, and then we have to stand up again in the Bruma Chapel to tell her to begin the battle, even though Martin, the Emperor-to-be, is right there. They both turn to the Argonian crouching on the altar and wait for him to give the go-ahead. That's 3 more failures in one short paragraph, bringing us to 20. Despite Martin only wearing his robes and helmet, we have a much rougher time in the battle for Bruma than he does. At our level, we're mostly fighting scamps and low-ranked Remora, but there are enough to tear us apart in melee combat. Granted, I was being stingier with the potions than I needed to be, and we certainly could have made this easier by using more of them. We spent most of the battle turning scamps into pincushions and dodging firebolts, with occasional panicked flailing if a Dremora blindsided us. We took quite a bit of damage crouch running for the Great Gate when it opened, but once we were inside we had a moment to heal up. We couldn't afford to hang around long, mind you. We never found a water walking potion, and without one we couldn't cross the lava and run under the bridge to get to the Sigil Tower. Even though we had the potions to survive the lava, it would have required us to swim, so it wasn't allowed. That meant we had to go up the towers and along the bridges as intended. I've only done this a few times and I always get lost, so there's almost certainly a better way to go about this than we did. But once we were past the lava, we fell through a gap in a broken bridge, tried to climb up the bank to the tower, couldn't because our jumping is craptastic thanks to our low acrobatics and slow movement speed, so we ran through the fire behind the siege engine to get under the other bridge where we could climb up. We couldn't jump around the gate near the Sigil Tower, so we had to go up the smaller tower to open it, and we couldn't outrun most enemies, so we had to fight them if they saw us. All these detours and fights, plus our slow movement speed, were adding up. For once, the timer inside the Great Gate might be a problem. We had less than 10 minutes by the time we made it into the Sigil Tower, and while things went a lot smoother once we made it inside, that didn't change the fact we were slow. By the time we made it to the Great Sigil Stone, we had less than 3 minutes left. If we'd had a water walking potion, we would have saved at least a couple minutes just from that, so that's on me, but I'm glad the time limit is generous. Once we're back in Tamriel, Martin approaches us and takes the Great Sigil Stone so he can head to Cloud Ruler Temple to prepare the ritual. We may as well follow him. We have enough arrows to get through Paradise, so I see no reason to wait. Unfortunately, Martin doesn't take our glare as a hint to start the ritual, so we have to stand up one last time to tell him to open the portal to Paradise, bringing our final failure count to 21. Paradise itself proceeds as normal. It was really nice of Mankar to give us all these alchemy ingredients for damage health poisons and restore health and magicka potions on the way there. Although it means I have an hour of flower picking footage I have to sort through to find the battles. The first time we entered the caverns, the 3 Dremora Overseers charged out before we even got to Eldamil, the frame rate started chugging, and then the game crashed when I tried to save after the fight was over. This may come as a surprise, but I don't get many crashes playing Oblivion on the Series X, and most of the ones I do get happen after the emulator has been running, actively playing or suspended, for a very long time. Maybe there's a minor memory leak in the emulator. Other than that, it's been very stable and some runs have had no crashes. Even the worst ones so far have only had 2 or 3, and that was during the Stalon hunt in the All Diseases run that went for real life days. Anyway, we have to fight those Dremora again because we won't be going along with Eldamil's lava cage that should have been a trap plan. I don't think we stop sneaking when we're locked in place for cutscenes because the camera doesn't pop up to standing height, but does walks like crabs seem like the trusting type to you? No, so we're going to ignore Eldamil and refuse his help as much as possible. He does appear deeper in the cave and starts another conversation with us where he removes the bands of the Chosen that we had to lock onto our wrists to get in here, but we refuse to let him follow us to Mankar. Speaking of Mankar, taking out Ruma and Raven before we entered his throne room was more difficult than fighting him was. We had to burn through about 6 of the many restore health potions we made on the way here, but thanks to them, he couldn't make a dent in our health. Our low DPS would have been a problem thanks to Mankar's tendency to heal spam, except he has no resistance to poison. And guess who brought along several vials of damage health poisons? They stack too. After we got a few of those on him, he couldn't out-heal the damage and the fight was over. Oddly enough, Mankar's magic resistance may have made him resist half the poison damage too, because magic resistance is that OP, but hey, it worked. Once we're back in Tamriel, Martin approaches us and takes the amulet. He also starts following us at the end of the conversation, so we can fast travel to the Imperial City without having to stand up. Akato also approaches us, even though Martin is right there, but we don't have to stand up to talk, so I don't mind, I'm just confused. Now we need to get Martin to the Temple of the One, and there are enough guards to deal with the Daedra inside the palace without much help from us. Once we're outside the palace, we can run past all the enemies to the Temple of the One. I thought it might be harder than usual since we're so slow, but most enemies went for Martin or the guards, so we didn't have any problems. Once we see Mehrunes Dagon, Martin runs up to tell us all is lost unless his crazy dragon plan works, and from that point on he ignores combat and follows us to the Temple of the One, where the crazy dragon plan does indeed work, and Martin banishes Mehrunes Dagon, proving that no, you can't beat Oblivion while always sneaking. In fact, you can't even start the main quest. If you don't consider the mandatory conversations to be failures, then yes, you can win, but I consider them to be failures myself. It's probably possible to eliminate a few of the 21 failures we had by routing the Joffrey-Martin conversations differently, but I don't think we could avoid them all without resorting to major glitches that would basically skip most of the main quest. Although I'd love to hear your ideas, so feel free to post them in the comments. Regardless, not being able to talk to merchants and other service providers, join most guilds, or start most quests in the pursuit of minimum failures presented interesting obstacles, so I had fun even though I considered the challenge impossible from the start. Speaking of, I hope you all had fun watching this video. If you did, then please consider subscribing if you haven't already. It really helps the channel. Channel memberships are also a thing if you want to support the channel further and get your name in the credits of these challenge runs. But regardless of all that, thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. That means a lot. See you next time to find out, can you beat Morrowind as a cat?